The mistake that you see a lot of times is people just speak in generalities. The interviewers have a job to do, and that's what people sometimes don't understand. They want you to be authentic. So if I ask you about a time question, tell me about a time you had a conflict with a supervisor, I'm evaluating your ability to resolve conflict. You have to be prepared to give a truly authentic answer that if I took all of your words and I repeated them, there's no way it could apply to me because of the specifics involved. That's what these interviewers are looking for.
Well, Bill, this month's theme in TPN Pro is skill upgrade. And since you are what I would call an expert in communication, I want to talk about communication as the upgrade that kind of unlocks everything else in the world of not only aviation, but networking and basically your life in general. So let's jump into kind of how this came about. Where did your standards mindset come from? Because you are heavily involved in the standards world. So was there a moment where good enough for you stopped being kind of acceptable and you wanted to move into the person holding the line on those kind of standards?
Oh man, I appreciate the question. And let me start by saying it's an honor to be here. And if you are calling, if I'm your expert, I don't know how many people must have said no for you to get down to me, but I'm flattered nonetheless
False
for
statement.
for
False.
for Adam Yuhan to be calling me an expert. But I appreciate that very much. Yes, you're right. At Spitfire, we do put a huge focus on communication, and it is the key to unlocking other things. And that's you put it that way the first, and that's I'm going to borrow that from you if you don't mind. That's a really great way to put it.
It's all yours.
But I'll tell you to answer your question. I think one of my skill sets maybe is always kind of looking at the end result first. What does that need to look like? How do you optimize that end result? And then let's work backwards. Okay. So when you look like when the end result, like maybe it's an interview question or something like that of what that's supposed to look like, then what do I need to do to get ready to have that authentic, optimized end result? And I don't know if there's a specific instance you were asking about, or if I'm off base, but or if I'm even answering your question, I'll give you a shot to recalibrate me here.
You're getting there. I think what there's no specific instance or
Okay.
circumstance yet. We'll get there. But I think it comes from that idea of when we're progressing through our career or even our personal life, sometimes good enough is good enough and we move on to the next thing. As aviators, as we grow a little bit, there's this period I think where we hit a point where the standard or the min is just not enough anymore. And we
Sure.
want to, and it's not necessarily on the flight deck or in the cockpit. It's tends to be more on the personal side of things where, oh, that's just not good enough anymore. And when you get involved into that world, you tend to see things in a much different light. I know I did when I became an evaluator. Was there maybe a moment or somewhere specific in your career where that good enough was just not good enough anymore and you had to take it to the next level and moving right into the next question. When you're evaluating somebody, the same idea applies. What do you look for first when that new standard is set or that's good enough's not acceptable? Because maybe it's not meeting the min.
Yeah, no, great point. There's a parallel here, and then a funny story I want to tell you. But I think to answer your question, one of the thing that I think you may remember when we worked together, but what I challenge our coaches for at Spitfire, what my desire is sometimes we get some really sharp people coming through, and they're really well prepared already. And so what I challenge everybody is, man, don't just throw good information at them. I want you to look at each person individually and go, what's the one thing I can present or give to make that person better, just a little bit better, even if they're already really sharp. What's the one thing? So that kind of changes your outlook and how you evaluate somebody. What's the one thing? Yeah, I know you're going to pass your check ride, so I'm just going to call it good. No, don't stop there. What's the one thing I can make this pilot better, not only for the check ride but for better? And we approach that the same way on the interview prep side. So I think if you're looking at yourself, I'd do that in the mirror, like to hopefully answer your question, like, hey, this is good enough, but how can I get just a little bit better? And if you're always challenging yourself with how can I get a little bit that much better, whether it's a relationship or, a business relationship with a vendor or something that I can improve upon, then let's do it. Never be satisfied with the status quo. Oh, that's good enough. How can I make this better? But your question reminded me of a funny story. So in the Marine Corps, I was the chief of stand eval, or whatever you want to call it, department head. I was flying with a Navy squadron in Meridian, the T-45s training. So I was the chief standardization officer, and all the instructors would come through and their training, and then I would be like their final out brief, and I would say, "All right, you're going to go. You're cleared to go fly with students. Good luck." And every once in a while, and quite frequently actually, one of them, especially like you get an F-18 guy that can do everything in the world in F-18, but he would come to me after this work and be like, "Hey man, I'm not ready to fly with students." And usually I would look at him and I would look at his training record and I'd be like, "You know what? You're right. You're not ready to fly with students, but you know what will make you ready? Flying with students." So get out there, get uncomfortable. You're safe. You'll keep them safe. They may not get your best in the first couple of flights, but after that, you will be ready. And then the rest of them will get your best. And that's just part of the process. So I don't know if I'm answering your question here, but getting out there and getting uncomfortable and executing is worth a lot.
Well, that's I think you nailed the question right there, because that seems to be when good enough was not acceptable to you anymore. It was like taking that leap of faith and going, "Well, I have to do this too." I mean, before you became the standards chief, you had to be the person who said, "I'm not necessarily comfortable going to fly with new students or people that might
Sure.
quote unquote kill me." So you had to go make that leap. So you became the confident in your ability type to then breed confidence in others. And that relates directly to my next question is, what's that difference between, okay, I am confident and that cool, calm, collected person that we all want to be, especially in the interview setting, or just being a good communicator, whether it's at our job or elsewhere. What's the difference between being confident and just calm? Where sometimes you meet the person who's just cool and calm, but they're really not confident or collected and they kind of don't know what's going on. I guess what I'm trying to say in interviews and on the flight deck, sometimes those things can get confused where you meet this person who's just chill, but you realize there is not a lot going on there and they're not confident in their abilities.
Sure.
Whereas you meet the consummate professional who is very confident, calm. So you can see the differences a lot when you do interview prep, but you also see them as being a line check airman and a
Hmm.
standard sky. Where do you notice that differences, and how can you bring that person who is just because they have a supernatural power to be calm all the time, and now to bring that confidence and breed it in there, is it still that you gotta just go do the job, or is there something more?
Yeah, a couple things that I think makes that situation very successful, or leaps and bounds above the other. And confidence is good, but the we're you not a day goes by where we're not saying the word authenticity around here. And when you bring your well, let me back up. There's the saying in aviation, right? Situational awareness occurs in real time, but it's built in pre-flight planning. So the more disciplined you are in the pre-flight planning, the higher your situational awareness will be in the mission itself, or in the approach down to mins itself and stuff like that. So the to answer your question, you need to have that core level of knowledge. So the discipline, so what breeds confidence, you need that disciplined study to be that competent professional. But then when you show up and you get next to a flying partner of either a captain or an FO, and you show up with humility and authenticity with your confidence, like, hey, here's what we're gonna here's a plan that I think is good, and here's all the reasons why. So you're showing your competence when you do that, but at the same time having the humility to say, hey, new hire FO, what do you think? What am I missing? And when you can do those things, communication is flowing both ways, because now you just that new hire FO that's 180 degrees different than you are. You vote different, you pray different, you think different, all those kind of things. And when you ask that person what their recommendation is, then that keeps the communication, and then you'll bring out their best. And it all comes from solid communication, that what makes us successful. And I can't tell you how many times an FO has saved me from myself. And I attribute it to me just being genuinely humble and like asking for questions. And then they feel free to speak up. And there's been, hey, I don't know if we should, I just thought about this. I'm like, oh my gosh, that could have been bad. I'm grateful for you.
Yeah. I hear in your not only what the words that you're saying, but the tenor is that you're not necessarily chasing this polish. Like polish is good, but sometimes it can come across as kind of used car salesman-y or
Right.
just somebody that you don't fully trust. So you're chasing these trust signals. And this goes, and we're going to get into this with interview stuff, but when you're just talking flying in general, if you don't trust the person that you're working with and sitting next to, man, that is a rough day at the workplace on the job site. And it can lead to bad things because the error chain can't sometimes be broken quickly enough. For the interview side of the house, which we're going to get into with communication discussion, is that error chain can unravel quickly. We both know that. We've seen that in
Mhm.
doing a lot of prep stuff. Let's get into that a little bit because we have a foundation now of your worldview and how things look. So let's talk reps because we say, just like you talked about, pre flight planning, preparation.
Mhm.
Nobody really defines it. Some people will put hours and hours and hours in. Other people think, "Oh, I did an hour of talking to Bill. I'm good to go."
Right.
And I think this goes far beyond, of course, interview prep. It's our whole career. So let's dive into that a little bit deeper.
Sure.
You guys say this wonderful line, and I love it. It's interview like a professional athlete.
Yep.
Explain that to me without the slogan. What's the film that we're studying? What are the drills that we're doing? What's the scrimmage look like? How is that going to make me ready to be an expert communicator in the environment to land this job that I've been dreaming about?
It's the same thing if you're gonna perform at a high level, where it's aviation or an athlete, where you're just doing all the same things. The formula is already out there. We didn't invent the formula. We just applied it to a space that's very unique. When you think about interviewing, now here's the luxury that the non-pilot professionals have, and I call it a luxury. People who don't interview well, they go out there and they interview and they fail and they fail and they fail, and then eventually they get pretty decent at interviewing and not good enough to get the job eventually. But if you're a software developer or a project manager, there's literally 100,000 companies you could potentially interview for. So you have that luxury to learn by failing out there. Pilots don't have that luxury because we're like baseball. There's everyone's trying, I shouldn't say everyone, but most people are trying to make it to the major leagues. And unlike baseball, though, where you've got however many, 26, 32 major league teams, in aviation, you got five-ish, six, seven that like most people are trying to get to. So if let's say you want to be at one of the majors, and you're interviewing, you get an interview, you want to interview with a major. Well, which major do you want to fly with? They're all great jobs, but only one of them has a base where you live. So the stakes could not be higher, and knowing that this world, the stakes are so high, we just applied a different approach. Well, guess what? There's high stakes in college football. And my business partner, Tron, played at TCU. He played with LaDainian Tomlinson back in the day. So he knows what high level athletic routines and SOPs look like. And it was his idea that we bring that to Spitfire. And I can break it down to you is it's just like a football game. You start, if you're preparing for, if you're look, preparing for the Patriots next week. Well, we got to start off in the film room. Okay. And so let's study. So at Spitfire, we run you through hours and hours and hours of videos and communications and on how to communicate and all that kind of stuff. And you should watch those multiple times, not just once. And then we move you from there. So now think of it for the football analogy. Now I've just given you the game plan to beat the Patriots. Okay. That doesn't mean you're going to get out there and execute it in game time if you don't drill it and practice it. So we move you then into group sessions. And so the group sessions, we run 4 to 5 of those a day, 7 days a week. So you have endless opportunities to watch other people getting ready to interview or to get into the seat yourself and actually practice. And that's where the reps come in. And for our program, hey, do as many of those as you want. That's unlimited. Reps, reps, reps. Just like your gym membership that you have, the gym doesn't say you can only come in here 2 times a week. And those who are serious, they're in there a lot. And that's the same process that you apply to being a really good interview. And then at the end of all of that, what you mentioned, the scrimmage, that's where we do your mock interview. So at this point, you should be really ready to go. And most people are at this point. But we're going to check you and we're going to do a one-on-one. We're going to simulate the interview of whatever airline you're going to, and then we're going to evaluate that. And most people are, by this point, they're ready. But if you're not, we're going to say, hey, I think you need another one of these. And we're going to do another one. And that's how we're going to make sure that you're ready. But that process is no different than any professional athlete would do, with some differences, of course.
So what's the biggest lie pilots believe about interview prep. And what I mean by that is the one that wastes the most time. Where's the thing where we talk about 80-20 principle? We just discussed this in our theme of changes. The 80-20 principle can be used to well, you can apply it to almost everything in life to get the biggest return for the least amount of time or whatever it is invested. What are the things that some of you, these candidates who are coming up and studying communications for the first time,
Mhm.
what's the one thing that you see them wasting their time on? Where they're just like, "I'm gonna just do this a ton," and then you're like, "Whoa, no, 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 no. This is not being efficient." And that efficiency is actually gonna decrease your effectiveness being a communicator in an environment that you're not used to.
Yeah, I don't know if I can narrow that down to one, but there's a couple competing issues that I see that are problematic because I get to see, a massive amount of data of people coming through. And what I see a lot is, to answer your question, people think, oh, I can just look at some trip reports, where people write, hey, these are the questions that Americans asking or United's asking, and people just study those. And there's a few people that are successful with doing that, but I see all the people who aren't successful because that's what it takes. They go and they don't get hired and they realize, oh wait, maybe there's more to this. Even though you had a good sense of what the questions are, you're not formally trained on what are the components of a really good answer. Number one. Number two, how do you make that answer authentic? Look, there's companies out there that will tell you, oh, you should say this. I demand that our coaches, we don't tell our clients what to say. We help them reach into their collection of life experiences, bring out the experience that's going to put the most points on the board. And to do that, you have to understand the process. You have to understand how interviewers evaluate you and score you, because they have to score you to make sure that they're not showing bias towards anybody. And I talk about that in my videos. So I see that sometimes. And then the other thing is a lot of times people think that they shouldn't get prepared until they have an interview. And here's the problem. United could call you and you could have an interview in 2 weeks. And that's not a lot of time. There's a lot to do to get ready for that. And so I'll tell you, when, we don't have many failures at Spitfire, but of course we do have some. And that's typically where they come from, is people that, and the worst of the worst is they got an interview in 2 weeks, they signed up for Spitfire, and then their flying schedule for their Part 135 company or their regional is so busy leading up to the interview that they have limited amounts of time to train. And that to me is another problematic, area where people aren't putting the most. I mean, these are multi-million-dollar careers. I mean, you got to throw everything at it. You got to make sacrifices because it's that important. Like, I know, sorry, I'll be quick here, but like, two guys came to me, they live in Charlotte. They interviewed at American. They didn't get hired. Okay. Now look, if I'm comparing, I think the interview at American's easier than the interview at Delta, but they didn't get hired. Then they came to us, two of them, a pair. We helped them. We got them ready. We worked. And then guess what? Fortunately, they did get an interview with Delta and they got hired. Okay. But here's the thing. They live in Charlotte. Their family's in Charlotte. Now the rest of their life, they're commuting to Atlanta or wherever the case, where they could have just driven to work. All things being equal, there's other things to dissect between the pros and cons of both companies, but that was what was most important to them. And now that opportunity at American, maybe it comes back in a year. And then you got a tough decision. Do I give up a year of seniority at Delta, this awesome company, to go start at the bottom at American? Or, anyway, they could have saved it all if they just prepared early.
That leads me to ask, in a case like that, if it's not just preparation, or when you know it when you see it, what makes an answer or answers in the aggregate hireable? Now, I know that we've talked about this many times, right? You and I have said if we had a sheet of the 10 questions they were going to ask and we had all the answers, we would just sell it for $10,000 and give you 11,000 back if you
That's
didn't.
right. That's
Because
right.
it'd be a lot easier for us and we'd make a ton of money doing virtually nothing.
Yeah.
But the reality is that's not the case. So, and I know this is one of those things that people want to hear what are the right answers,
Mm-hmm.
but there is more of a amorphous piece to this. So what makes answers in the aggregate hireable? Yep, I see it. This person's ready. What's in it?
The answer to that question is your authentic answer. And that's what these interviewers are looking for, is they want you to be authentic. And by the way, that doesn't mean perfect. Back when you and I were preparing, we try to have every answer perfectly polished and, it was super competitive. Look, it's still competitive now. The airlines haven't changed any of their standards, but you don't need perfect answers in the interview. As long as you're being authentic and genuine and you give an answer Look, the interviewers have a job to do, and that's what people sometimes don't understand, is they have a core competency in mind that they're targeting. They want to evaluate whether you have this. And we have a principle that we teach, which is a previous behavior is a predictor of a future performance. So if I ask you a tell me about a time question, let's say, tell me about a time you had a conflict with a supervisor. I'm evaluating your ability to resolve conflict. So I have to give you a score on the core competency of conflict resolution. And so you have to be prepared to give a truly authentic answer that if I took all of your words and I repeated them, there's no way it could apply to me because of the specifics involved. And the mistake that you see a lot of times is people just speak in generalities. Well, I believe in treating everybody with respect and everybody gets a fair shot. And I would want to listen to what everybody says. And I would take all that information, digest it, and then I would make a decision and be like, hey, those are all good words, but you didn't answer the question. And if an interviewer is in a good mood, he or she will follow up and try to pull that individual unique experience out of you. Or they could just move on, but there's no way you can get a good score. And that's where I get people like, I don't know. I thought the interview went great and I didn't get hired. And I'm like, well, tell me about how you answered this question. I'm like, yeah, you didn't give any of the specifics. You got to give them the ability to do their job, which is one, get to know you. Number two, evaluate you on these core competencies that they're targeting. And that's a lot of words. I'm not even sure I answered your question.
No, you totally did. I mean, you talked about authenticity, and I wanna delve a little deeper into that subject because how do you train authenticity through this kind of procedure that we're talking about here as a pro athlete,
Sure.
without turning it into a performative event? This is extremely challenging. Some people, this is easy for. Many people, this is and I would say pilots kind of fit this narrative. They're high achiever a lot of them are really high achievers. So they go and instead of saying, "I'm gonna be authentic," it's like, "I'm gonna be as authentic as I possibly can be," and it's almost like now it's this performative event where they're on stage for an hour and they're putting the most authentic piece of themselves they can be, which then becomes a performative act. And sometimes, let's call a spade, several pilots are not great actors. And to go and act for an
Are you
hour,
speaking for yourself?
I'm I'm going to plead the Fifth Amendment on that one. I am a failed voice actor, Bill, so I will
Adam's
take
a great actor. I've seen it firsthand.
I would take the line to say that where is that line where authenticity can be trained, but do not turn it into some performative act? So how do you train that?
You said something there three times that I'm really excited that you said because performative. That's exactly what you don't want to do, and you're 100% right to emphasize that and say that. And I just don't want it to go unnoticed. One of the things that we teach people right out of the gate is that first you need to understand your authentic self is good enough. Okay, the truth is good enough. Okay, most of us don't have perfect flying careers. Okay, myself included, and that's okay. And so what people want is an authentic answer to the question. And so you just need to go back and look, you can stutter, you can say a couple times. And that's where the people that are trying to be performative or that's all the focus and trying to have this perfectly polished scripted answer. I tell people never script your answers. Bullet points are good. If you practice a tell me about a time you had a conflict question, if you practice it today 10 times and then you practice it every day for the next 3 weeks, okay, and that's a good example of reps, you practice it, telling your authentic story, that answer will evolve over time. And on interview day, it'll probably be somewhat different than the last time you practice it, but it'll still carry those core components that are authentic. And that's the key. And just having a genuine conversation, a coffee shop conversation. Imagine Adam, you and me at the coffee shop, and you ordered your latte with vanilla spice, and I've got my black coffee. Just kidding, I order the lattes too. But imagine we don't know each other like we do, and I just say, hey, tell me about flying for the Air Force. Tell me about your most difficult mission. And the way that you would tell me, and I would add with a little bit of flair of understanding how to put the most points on the board, but that story. And then I have the ability to be like, wow, so what happened? Like, what did that person do? Where did you land? Like I can have that dialogue back and forth. And then I get an idea and to see in your judgment, decision making, like, well, why did you divert to all you did? And you can be like, well, hey, I had this medical emergency and I had this going on. And then that kind of back and forth that's just purely authentic is what an interviewer really wants to see. And interviewers, and I talk to them all the time. I have several friends that interview for American. They can spot a performance right out of the gate. We call it canned answers or scripted answers. People have clearly prepped this answer many times. And then what they'll do is they'll ask a follow-up question or they'll interrupt you because they sense the performative thing. And look, they're all the grace in the world. That's not going to hurt you if you're doing that. But how you respond to an authentic question that you couldn't have prepared for, that's where they get people off track. And we teach you to be ready for that. We have a joke here that like everybody always wants the questions. Hey, what questions is Delta asking? What questions is American asking? And we kind of like to think of that scene in the original Matrix when Nemo's like, am I going to be able to dodge bullets? And he goes, someday you won't have to.
Yeah.
So we prepare you. Someday you won't have to know what the questions are going into the airlines because you'll understand the components and how to answer in an authentic manner. So anyway, sorry, enough about me, but
You nailed it. And before we move on to the next thing, because I do want to ask specifically about that. I don't think Nemo dodged any bullets, but he definitely did keep on swimming.
Nemo,
Yeah, 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 it was great. It was great. It was, I would love to see Neo and Nemo.
keep on swimming.
Yeah, yeah, it'd be awesome. I
Neo.
think you nailed on something there, like the scripted thing, and I wanted to tie it all together with when a pilot does become over prepared because it's happened. When I did interview prep too, I saw it. Somebody would put all the reps in, but they would take it to the level of memorization, starting to sound scripted. They were so ready for the canned question that when you took them off route,
Yep.
they had problems. How do you get them back to human before they go to launch?
Can I just say, I just realized there's a phrase I've been repeating for years, and I learned it from you all those years ago when we first met. Being an actor yourself, you told me that a monologue is about the most difficult thing a highly trained actor can do. I don't know if you remember telling me
Mhm.
this,
Yeah.
but I have told this hundreds of times. I've repeated that phrase that I learned from you because people want to write out their tell me about yourself, and they want to write it out and they want to script it out. And if it's that difficult for a professional actor, we know those pilots don't have a chance. So we got to find a different approach. So anyway,
Especially when you say that too, think of it this way. Maybe it's not that I'm sure the best in the world can look at a script, have it memorized, and Daniel Day-Lewis probably has no issues, but
sure.
a guy like me who has a little bit of training had a lot of issues. And I think when you look at it too, is if you're scripting this out, the story, and this is just my 2 cents, the story becomes not yours anymore. It becomes what you've put on paper so many times and you've read it over and over and over and over again that it becomes tinny. It's got a veneer of metallicness that just doesn't feel real any longer.
That's right.
So instead of going up and repping out and repeating the same words over and over again, it's telling the story without the words being written down. Bullet points, I think, are what you're saying is great, outlining what you
Sure.
want. That's key. But if you've written a 7-page script and you're going to try to memorize that, it's not great. That's kind of what I've heard over the years and what I've done and worked with you and talked about this stuff. And it's just what I keep coming back to with a lot of these folks. It's building a communication system that's going to hold up under the stress of an interview, which, oh, by the way, is going to hold up in other places in your life as well, especially shockingly so on the flight deck. It's amazing how you will run into these communication struggles as you move forward. It's not always with the people that you're flying with, too. It's everybody else that's coming up into the cockpit, interrupting your procedures, wants to ask questions from anywhere from passengers to maintenance to flight attendants. It's all different. And I think this is a great building block for you to keep moving. If you treat it as such, if you just take the and hey, I got the job, and then you ram dump the comms, the communication strategies that you learned can actually be a degradation in your skill set going forward. And this is all about skill upgrades. So
Mhm.
now let's move on to something else here. I wanted to take a little detour here because this is also very communications oriented, and I didn't know this about you until not too long ago. But you are kind of in the PBS world, PBS gurus, and
Preferential bidding.
you can pitch this all you want to. I wanted to talk about this kind of stuff. So, for those of you who don't know what PBS is, preferential bidding system, most airlines have some version of this. There's different companies that actually build the software that the airline bids on, and that's not just pilots, it's pilots and flight attendants most of the time. And it looks like this giant math equation where it's like algorithms and nonsense. And when you first see it, you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And you don't. But it's really, in my mind, it's a communication between what the pilot or what the crew member wants and what the company is going to give you. Do you agree with that? It's essentially translating a life goal into precise inputs. And
That's
that life
right.
and that life goal changes every single month.
Yeah, and it's a
S
whole month. I mean, again, the stakes are high,
Yeah, they
whole
are.
month.
So what's the most common bidding mistake that you think is more of a we're gonna target this, like, not just the most common bidding mistake you see or anything like that, but what's the most common bidding mistake that's actually a communication failure between the pilot and the company, or the pilot and themselves, the pilot, their family? Like, I wanted some days off, but the bid didn't say that, or I wanted X trip, but didn't get it because of XYZ. What
Yeah.
so kind of relaying it back to this communication piece.
I think I can give you a good example here. So for PBS, people are really good at knowing, hey, I like 3-day trips. I like overnights in the Caribbean. Like people are really good at knowing what they want. So that's never the issue. But sometimes people don't think like a programmer thinks, which is what you have to do. And thanks for the opportunity. PBSgurus.com for American Airlines is where we do all this stuff. So people will call us and be like, I thought I knew what I was doing. I only like 3-day trips, but they gave me 6 days in a row of flying. And we said, well, yeah, it did exactly what you told it. You said, give it 3-day trips and you gave it all the days. And so you're not thinking in terms of line properties, which there's trip properties or pairings. They're called pairings, but trip properties, and then there's line properties. Line, think of like the calendar. Things like, hey, I want 3-day trips, but I want at least 2 days off between trips. People don't intuitively think that. It's just kind of assumed. And so to answer your question, what our team at PBS Gurus is really good at is asking those questions like, okay, so you like 3-day trips. How do you feel about flying them back to back? Is that good or bad? And it's different for every person. I got a friend in Oklahoma. He wants 3 days back to back. And I'm like, you're crazy, but okay, that's what you want to do. Whereas I'm like a 3-day trip during the week, every week kind of guy. That's what I would prefer. So our team asking the right questions is a huge form of communication. So another quite great question that we like to ask is, tell me what you hate. And then that triggers people's brain to be like, oh, you know what? I don't like going to Mexico City, or I don't like going to Guatemala City because that's scary down there, which I'm going there a couple days, by the way, and it is scary. Especially when you take a brand new FO, is its first day at American Airlines. No big deal. Anyway, pray for me. But no, they do great.
I'll be thinking about you. And maybe if a pilot got just 10% better at communicating what they want, and I would argue what they don't want is more important because like I agree with you. When you ask somebody what they don't like, it triggers way more.
That's right.
It's essentially what all of social media is based off of, right? To garner
Yeah.
clicks. What do you think changes? Like the schedule, the home life, the stress level, just that 10% better. Where is the payoff? Especially somebody who's kind of junior right now. Let's kind of target a group, maybe in that where you can fake your seniority. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah. Well, a good point. Again, it comes down to good communication because, what we'll do is when we ask somebody, hey, what's most important to you? What are you trying to achieve with this next month? I mean, is it where you go is what's important? Because for most pilots, for me, I don't care where I go. I want to start late, I want to work the least amount of time for the most amount of money, just like every pilot, right? So when you flesh all that stuff out, sometimes like I've asked the clients, I'm like, hey, they'll say, hey, these days off are this weekend off is really, really important to me. And I'll ask them the question like, okay, is it so important to you? If you can't get it as a line holder, are you willing to take reserve? Or do you want to take your chances in the trip trade arena? Okay. If you don't get it. And then once you flush that out, be like, no, 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 I'll take reserve. I got to have this 4 days off. I'm like, okay. So now I can layer your bid to give me any line with those 4 days off. If not, give me a long haul reserve line with those 4 days off, which I know he or she can hold. But I'll even build backups into that and say, okay, now if you can't hold those days off, you definitely don't want to be on reserve. So I got to make sure your line is structured for that. So now you fall into the next, we'll go back to bidding a line, working those days, but I'll try to get you the most tradable trip over those days so you can get out of it. So we tend to think, second, third, fourth iteration of when you don't get what you want. Whereas most pilots are just like, I want these things. And then they don't have a plan for when they don't get those things. And we make all our success, whether we're, when we do a good job, it's because we communicated really well and we roll those things out. And when we do a bad job and we mess up somebody's bid, which has happened, we make mistakes too. It's because that communication wasn't flowing in the console. And then, what's great for the next month? We know we know what to ask. It's fixed. So it's never a problem more than once. But I mean, those are rare occasions. But I'm just being authentic with you. When we've messed it up, it's been because of poor communication.
I agree. After being a PBS bidder for because my first job in the 121 world, we had traditional bidding,
Mhm.
and it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
Just rank order the lines and then rank order the reserves, and then boom, and you get what you get. And PBS, when you start to figure it out, or you have some help figuring it out, or you have some help bidding it, you tend to have this false seniority inflation because there's some people who just don't or won't mess with it. They just bid their days off and they get what they get and they fly their line and they're good with that and whatever. And when you start figuring out those things like denial mode, and when people can go, hey, maybe I don't want this trip, but if I grab it because of a certain weekend, 4th of July, for instance, and it's a good quality trip that somebody's going to get paid maybe a little extra to fly, I might be able to throw it out on the open or the trade board in the Thunderdome and let somebody else take it from me. I think when we look at something like bidding, you can extrapolate it out to a bigger picture of bids or interviews or anything as to kind of the whole concept of the person, right? Because you're trying to have this great bid to make decent money, but have more time off, more time working to live, not living to work. And I think that rolls into the professional pilot just in
Mhm.
general, and how when you have to bring professionalism to work, you're part of this new professional community, especially those that leave the military and get out and start doing this for the first time. It's it's a whole different aspect of your career, vice your home life and everything else. And when you show up, especially at day one of Indoc, you feel this intent desire and need to be buttoned up, the most professional you've been since you probably got commissioned in the military. So for you, what is professionalism in one sentence? Because we all claim it. We all claim we're professional aviators. So what's professionalism to you?
Gosh, that's a tough one. Probably a holistic set of disciplined processes. So
Ooh, that was good, man. That was tough. Come on, that sounded really good.
no,
I'm
I
gonna listen to
swear.
that over and over until I have
Well,
it memorized.
well, because look, professionalism is a lot of things to a lot of people. It's how you look, it's how you're dressed, it's how your hair looks. And that varies a little bit. Good story on that if you're interested. But the recalibrating people's view of professionalism on that. But it's how you perform your job in terms of what time. Do you show up on time? Do you show up early? How much you prepare before the flight? Are you one of those who does nothing until you get onto the flight deck and you're learning for the first time that the weather's down to mins and our fuel's a little bit light, and all those kind of things. So, but the reason I thought of that is because those are all the things that went through my mind that I immediately think of professionalism. But the only way I excel or even do okay at those is just because I have processes for everything. I have a process on how I prepare myself or how I prepare for a flight. And if you stay disciplined to those, I get nervous saying that as well, just because, it takes a crowd. You need opinions. You need other opinions because, there's nothing better than a good friend group that'll keep you straight. I mean, shoot, man, just a very short time ago, I went to my wife and I was like, hey, what do you think of this? And I'm like, want to look professional for this podcast. She's like, nope, go put it on the blue quarter zip. I'm like, okay. So,
The I like to call it the ruthless mentor mentality. Like,
yeah.
yeah, I want people to be ruthless mentors to me, and sometimes I do that to others and realize that that's not what they need right then and there, so I wanna ease them into that. If they ask for mentorship, I tend to ease them into it, but at some point, we have to get there, and I wanna go back to something. I wanna go back to this story. Let's hear the story that you wanted. You're ready to tell a story, and I love when you tell a good story. So I
Well, I
want
don't know if this is a good story, but it's an important story that I think it's a great story as as society, as things evolve. As this I was just bragging about our team at Spitfire the other day, just about how freaking cool they are, and you got guys like Tron and Euron, and we can show up a meeting and they'll have their hats on backwards, and they're cool, good looking dudes. And if we do a webinar, like they see our authentic self. And I was explaining how we do well when we do that, because these guys are just being who they are, right? So, chief pilot story. So, and this is a lesson in culture. Okay, so a new hire FO, African American, had braids, and his hair was in braids, and flew with a captain who was much older, good captain, good professional captain. But that captain went to the chief pilot and said, "This FO is unprofessional," and because of the way his hair is. And so, fortunately, you had a chief pilot in the office that kind of knew the FOM. And by the way, the FOM isn't the same as what it was in 1998. Things have changed,
Mhm.
and other things that are still professional are now in there, and this being one of them. So it was a great opportunity for this chief pilot to be like, hey, we need to understand the difference between professionalism and understand that what's culturally can also be professional. And there's nothing wrong with the way that he does his hair. And what I need you to know is now look at that and go, that is being professional, because it was well kept and all that kind of stuff. So that now you have to recalibrate your mind to someone maybe who thought differently for all these years. Go, hey, that is now what professionalism looks like. And so it's changing, like 10 years ago, if you had one visible tattoo, you were ostracized. Now there's a lot of professionals that have tattoos all over themselves. So are they unprofessional? I mean, there's a line somewhere what they have tattooed, but like these days, I mean, 15 years ago, I thought a little bit differently, but now, I mean, I don't, if a guy has a sleeve of tattoos that looks good, then so be it. That's so that can be professional too.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did, because I know people who have a wholly different approach to how they look, who are far more professional on a day-to-day basis than I could ever hope to be. In the
Mhm.
way that they present themselves, the ability to command a room for a briefing on engineering topics that I don't understand. And somebody may look at them and be like, "Pff, they're not professional." It's like, with timeout, maybe they don't look what you think is a professional should look like, but the preparation, the devotion they have to doing a job and a job well done, and the fact that they are abiding by whatever the company standard is, that's professionalism. And if you
Mhm.
can't accept that, maybe you're the one who's got the professional problem. And I'll throw this out there. So this will be my hot take, because of you talked about that, is I hear that from some captains or even just pilots that I know, and a bunch of them look like they're wearing a duffel bag when they come to work, right? Like,
Yep.
and to me, nothing spews unprofessionalism in aviation if your uniform looks completely garbage. Now, I'm not saying you have to have your marine dress blues on. We're not all Bill Sims. We can't all do that. We understand. But if you can't just give just a little care, just a little bit of care. In fact, every chief lounge I've ever been in, you can get them kind of ironed up or whatever. And I'm not saying you got to go crazy, but just not looking like a total slob when you come to work.
Mhm.
Now, I will caveat all this. When I was at Atlas, oh, I broke this rule 8 ways from Sunday because there was nobody looking at us,
Yeah.
and I would say, was my integrity low? No, I just didn't have the same opinion of myself. The other thing I look at is when you go for an interview, we can kinda relate it back to this. You and I have talked about this many times. The company's looking at you as what? As a symbol of their company to the public, and if you don't look the part, it's not the greatest look for the company. What that could mean in the long run, and this is a stupid slippery slope that I probably shouldn't even go down, but I will just for this one moment, is if everybody's doing it, then you're going to detract from the company appeal and whether or not they're going to make money, blah, 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 blah. That's the extrapolation to the far end.
Sure.
The reality is a little bit of self pride. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be tatted up to the nines and all this other stuff, but just looking a little bit like the part. We don't all look like the part from the 60s Pan Am captain anymore. In fact, almost none of us do. So,
Mhm.
anyways, a little bit of a diatribe, but something that I think we both agree on. To kind of sum up this professionalism thing and bring it back into a couple last questions here. If you were to take this and look at one skill upgrade that could pay off everywhere, whether it's hiring or beyond, something that Captain FO, any applicant, a brand new pilot who's just starting out, what could they start right now, today, this week, to start moving down this road of I'm going to upgrade this skill set and become, I'm going to get way more payout than I would by putting this effort in right now?
I have an answer for your question, but if I could do like a dramatic pause and follow up on professionalism that I think is relevant to your audience here. I was able to have a meeting with American Airlines hiring team, and there was other companies there too. It wasn't exclusive for Spitfire, but I was hoping to gain this upper level, graduate, doctorate level knowledge of their process that they were willing to share, by the way, that would make me a better interview prep company. Okay. And again, there was others there. So, and I was really excited for this. And then you know what they talked about was the biggest problem that they see and what they wanted us to then bring to the masses to help people prepare. I couldn't believe it. Professionalism. I mean, 101 level stuff.
Wow.
People showing up in attire that is not an interview suit. And Tina made it very clear. There are suits and then there are interview suits. Okay. There are Sunday morning church suits. It's not an interview suit. There are suits that you wear out on a Friday night to the club. That is not an interview suit. They have seen it all. Okay. There's the suit that Jim Carrey wore in Dumb and Dumber. Okay. You don't wear that to an interview. They have seen it. I'm talking about the Texan cowboy Barolo tie thing. That's happened. Okay. Anyway, there were many more examples. The bag that you carry. Okay. When I interviewed, and this is going back many years, but when I interviewed an American, there was a person in our group that looked really good. He had a good looking suit on. And then all his logbooks and everything was in a JanSport backpack that looked like it had been dragged behind a truck. like, like you almost made it, man. You almost looked professional until you did that. And then they talked about people's logbooks being unprofessional. So, like, again, a disciplined set of processes, right? So, good interview suit, good briefcase or bag or whatever you want to call it, and then their logbooks they're just junk, chicken scratch, no summary sheet, nothing. They can't do anything with it. Missing items that they were asked to bring. That's a good way to get sent home really quick. So anyway, that's the professionalism. But to answer your question, what's the one thing that people can do? Besides the set some processes for yourself, some SOPs for yourself to be consistent every time. I don't know that this is a good answer for your question, but what keeps coming to mind is relationships. You got to invest in other people with your time and your effort with the expectation that you will get nothing in return. And if you do that consistently over time, I'm amazed to this day. Most of the opportunities that I've had or with Spitfire, that Spitfire's had, is either relationships that Tron has been cultivating for 20 years. Okay. And a lot of our, I call it our success, but our movement has happened because of that. Or, I was flattered. I've been asked twice to interview for a management position at American, and I was flattered by that. And these were based on people that I would just say I think I was a good friend to them for the years. Now they went up into management positions, and I'm just a lowly, line pilot or check airman, whatever you want to call it. And they're doing all the big things. And I was a good friend. I invested in them, tried to help them every chance. PBS is a perfect example. That was kind of where a lot of my relationships with. I had this knowledge of PBS, and I was willing to help anybody who needed it. Just pro bono, just to help. And I never realized, when you're young, you don't realize how valuable that is, because now when you get into your, mid 40s or later, you realize that when you look back, I can also look back and be like, man, I bet you this opportunity would be available if I'd been a better friend or been a better, invested more in that relationship back then, because I've lived long enough to bear the fruits of all that. So anyway, that's, and that communications, I think, intertwined and all that.
You summed up so much there in a way where you and Tron say this thing, you've been saying it to me for years, and we've actually this came about by figuring out stuff for TPNX, actually, where we really talked about transactional relationships,
That's right.
and how before that I knew what one was, but I didn't understand how to describe it or really come to grips with what a transactional versus a personal relationship was, a truly true personal relationship. And it's something that I talk about all the time with so many people. Don't be transactional. Don't look at it. What can you get? What can I get from you? Because I'm going to get
Mhm.
you this. Because you're just going to go your separate ways, and that's the end of it. I just had this hanger fly the other day where I was talking to two young pilots, and I said to both of them, the networking piece that you think is somewhat pointless, or maybe these conversations don't really mean anything now, in 10 years are going to mean more than you can possibly imagine, because you're going to meet people that are going to go on and do stuff that you didn't know was possible in aviation or outside of aviation. And you're going to be connected with them if you don't view it as transactional. If you give something to them with no intent of return, if you're just their friend, and one day they're going to be able to help you or want to help you or going to save you from yourself in a way that you never thought was possible. Now, I'm not saying that it's every one of these people, but there are going to be these individuals throughout your life that you're otherwise going to have tossed to the side. So what you said right there, and I think this sums up communication, professionalism, care and feeding about reps, treating things like a pro athlete and being system and process oriented, all goes back to the very basics. If you are have personal relationships that you thrive on and you practice those reps of talking to those people, asking questions, just caring about their day, you're going to go so much further than if you sit back and you try to treat an interview or anything else in your life as transactional.
100%.
So you gave me some really good stuff. Obviously, I think that was my best summary I've ever done in my life. So I appreciate it. That's because you did it. Um,
Fantastic.
if you are out there and you're listening uh, to us talk about this stuff and you want structure around the reps that you're already doing, go check out what Bill, Tron, and the Spitfire team have built and continue to build. We'll have links in the show notes for all this stuff. Bill, is there anywhere else that people should come find you, reach you, communicate with you? Because you do have a wealth of knowledge far outside of PBS and communications. You are a very accomplished pilot, both militarily and in the airline world. How can people find you and see what you do and get some keep growing that knowledge base of
Oh, I
themselves?
appreciate that, man. You more so, my friend. But no, I'd say, yeah, please come find me on my LinkedIn. Just Bill Sims, Spitfire. You should see it there, and then connect with me there. Feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn, and I'll respond. And then I would say plug into the, you got two fantastic resources. I mean, the ecosystem that is TPN, and what you guys did from the start and what you're doing now, what is great is that you network people together and you get people talking together, sharing experiences. And so the key is you got to stay plugged in. So plug in with TPN, and then I would say get on the Spitfire newsletter as well, so you're plugged in on interview, changes and the things that are happening with those two things. And if you just do those two things, I call them the stray dogs, that just people call up and, they're like, "Oh, I haven't been hired. I've been applying for 2 years." I'm like, "Are you part of TPN? No. Are you part of, any, no organizations? Do you go to any conferences? No." It's just like, well, you're not helping yourself because you're not plugging in, and you got to stay informed. This is Major League Baseball. The stakes are high, and you got to invest your time in doing all that. So that's my thoughts.
Awesome. Well, go check Bill, Tron, and the team out, spitfireelite.com. Again, links will be in the show notes. Hit them up on LinkedIn. If you guys want more information about Bill, the team at Spitfire Elite, or anything that we're doing at TPN, hit me up at heyguys@thepilotnetwork.com. I answer every email that I ever get, and sometimes I'll just find people who've written me in the past and read them anyways because I'm lonely. No, I'm just kidding. I don't do that. But Bill, thanks again for being here, man. It's been an honor to be your friend, and it's really fun to watch what you guys are doing and seeing how these people are just affected for the rest of their life because what you've taught and how you've mentored them in a way that I don't think they were ready for when they first walked through that Spitfire Elite digital door. So thanks for all you do for the community. I appreciate it.
Oh shoot, man, it's pales in comparison to what you do. Thank you, but you for those who don't know, I mean, Adam and Matt have built this thing out of just pure love and passion. They're not getting rich off this thing by any stretch, and they do this because they love it and they do it. And I've learned a lot about you through our offline conversations and how much you pour into this organization, and it's truly, you've helped thousands and thousands, if not more, pilots get that little bit better because of the work that you've done. It's tremendous service to our community. So I'm grateful.
Well, thank you. I don't know what to say. So I guess I'll just wrap up with the old tagline: keep the shiny side up, the greasy side down. Fly safe, everybody.